Welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. I'm your host, André Hedlund, educational psychologist, author, geek, and nerd. This show brings you science and learning through conversations with stellar people from different fields. Put on your spacesuits and hold tight. Our voyage into the learner's universe begins now. Okay, so welcome to the Learning Cosmos podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here, Jared Cooney Horvath.
Thank you so much. And episode number 1, this is wonderful.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to be ready because I wanted to start the podcast with you. But you know what? It actually worked out really well because I wasn't ready. I was still setting up everything. So yeah.
I don't know if anyone will ever be ready for anything. It's sooner or later, you just got to jump in and say, what happens? We'll build it as we go.
That's very true. But, it's really a privilege for me to have you on the very first episode because I've been following your work very closely, I'd say, because, ever since we met, I was, kind of inspired by what you do. And I tried to do something similar here in Brazil as well. But I wanted to start with a very complicated question, maybe. Why science? Why did you get into science? What kind of attracted you to that area?
Man, to be honest, I'm probably the world's worst scientist. Because I believe it or not, I love science. Like I love science when it's being done right. I absolutely dislike it when it's being done pedantically. Yeah. And so I'm the least pedantic scientist you will ever meet. So I never got into science until I was in my mid-20s. My undergrad was in film. I wanted to be a filmmaker, a director. I was in a band for a long time, bartender for a couple of years.
Wow.
There's a book called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. Have you read that one?
I haven't, no, but I will now. Yeah.
Oh, that was the book that I read that and I'm like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. It was like the first book I read about the brain that wasn't just, you are a brain. Neurons really matter, blah, blah, blah. It was the first book that's like, wait a second, there's a whole lot more to this than we typically talk about. And so I got really excited. And there was a chapter in there about a guy who uses magnets to stimulate the brain.
Oh, okay.
And at the time I was a teacher and I'm thinking, oh, well, this is perfect. Maybe I can make like a thinking cap. Can I improve learning by stimulating the brain at the right time? So I called the guy out of the blue and I said, hey, can I come work in your lab? And he said, absolutely. And
wow.
That's it. So that was probably 20 years ago almost now. And so I've just been doing it ever since. And I'm still, to this day, I love science. I love what I do, but I'm the edge guy. Like there are
sure.
Many scientists dislike me because I don't take a lot of BS.
Of course, yeah.
I'm not very pedantic. Like there's nothing I hate more than science as a religion. Like a lot of scientists are like, everyone is wrong except for me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We're just human beings too.
Yeah.
The second I became a scientist is when I realized science is as creative as anything else. It's creativity, but none of it is, we're never 100% right. Like there's nothing I do that's perfectly true. There's just ideas and thoughts. And that's what I really love to play around with, is get new data and come up with ways to interpret it and say, what does this mean for us?
And that's something that I've always asked people, why are people so against science nowadays? I think they don't understand the mission, the purpose of science, right? So if you had to define science, because I really want to hear a couple of definitions on the show. What is science, Jared, and why is it so important?
So mine will almost certainly be different than most other people's. And I think there's a big pushback against science because I think we went through this big science phase with the Big Bang Theory, right? That TV show, and everyone and it was the most popular people were Richard Dawkins and Bill Nye the Science Guy and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And the joke is these people aren't scientists. Between them, I've published more papers last year than they have in their entire careers. They're not scientists. They're basically science communicators, which is an awesome job. But the problem is they mixed their ideology with everything else. They basically said science is truth, science is objective, science is everything. Everyone else is, there is no God, there's no you, there's no... And of course people are going to get pissed off at that. You're basically taking humanity and you're saying you're wrong, I'm right. Greatest way to piss people off, tell them they're wrong and you're right. Surest way to make sure they're never going to like you again. So
Yeah.
honestly, I don't mind the science pushback because I kind of think we earned it. We deserved it. We got way too big, way too fast. So I define science as we are basically the myth makers of our generation. So every generation has a set of people. We're not the first to develop evidence.
Yeah.
Ancient cultures weren't idiots. They have concepts of evidence and data. And then they have a group of people that interpret what that means to place humans within society, to say, here's where we fit in the larger cosmos. And for a long time, they were the myth tellers, the storytellers that became religion. And now I think it's science. And I don't think we're doing anything more or less than what they were doing. We're using the data we have to then help make sense of the world. Who are we? How do
Exactly.
we fit into this? How does it work? And
Yeah.
so I call us the myth makers as opposed to the truth tellers, because I think data by its very nature is blind and deaf and silent. Data is just data. It's just numbers. It means nothing until someone comes through and interprets it. And that's the thing we miss in most of science. We think we're doing something that's completely objective. Best of luck, mate. You're a human being. There's no
That's
such
true.
thing as
Yeah.
objective. As soon as we open our eyes, man, we're being subjective. So our job is to interpret that data in a meaningful way. Now we have standards, but everyone has had standards. Like if you go back to Greek myths, a myth maker couldn't just say anything. Okay, now this god's going to kill this god. Why? There are rules, there are structures to it. If you really go down into ancient myths, what you see is it has a very strong tie to the world, to the earth, how it works. And all the gods are mimicking different pieces of the world, and they have rules to what they can and cannot do, dependent upon what volcanoes, the oceans, the sky can do. And we're doing the same thing. So we have rules too, but at the end of the day, man, our job is to interpret and hopefully help people situate themselves a bit better.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that because paradigms are always shifting, right? We're always changing our
Hmm.
minds about different things, and I think the more data we collect and the more we advance in terms of technology and different tools, the
Yeah.
more we interpret data in a different way, and then we come up
Yep.
with new ideas, new solutions, perhaps that might work, but not always because there's always
And
something more, right?
I think
Yeah,
it's interesting that a lot of scientific theories work, but that doesn't mean that they're true by any
yeah,
stretch of the imagination. I can name a million things that work, but have no bearing on reality.
yeah.
Geometry works in absolute treat. There's not an absolute triangle anywhere in nature. It's
That is
not
very true.
real.
Yeah,
It's an idealized form. So what I think a lot of people view science and the work we do as kind of like we're a triangle. We're moving towards an apex, towards a pinnacle where we will understand everything. The grand unified theory.
yeah.
I absolutely do not see what we're doing like that at all. I see us as more like a spider web, where every time you do something, there's like 16 new questions that come off of that. So I don't think this will ever end. I don't think we're on some path to complete understanding. I think we're just evolving and we change. And
We
as
are.
tools change, we change our opinion. As data comes in, we change our interpretation. And I have a feeling it will never end. There's never going to be a stop to this.
And I think that's very Socratic of you, because when I was doing a lot of research in a couple of years ago to write my book, I got into Socrates, right? And I
Yeah.
think the most famous quote is that I know nothing, and the more you know, the more you realize there's much more to know, right? And
Bingo.
but here's another interesting question for you: why brain science? So what drew you into that field? Because I know a lot of people now who have been promoting ideas based on neuroscience or
Yeah.
psychology, educational psychology, because I think there's a certain appeal.
Yeah.
I had some professors who used to say that neuroscience is sexy, so everybody wants to listen to a podcast or watch a session on neuroscience. So what drew you to that area?
Man, if it's sexy today, it was supermodel sexy back when I got into it.
Yeah,
It was the decade of the brain. 2000 to 2010 was the decade of the brain,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that was just right in my sweet spot. And I cared about learning and thinking. And at the time, psychology was trying to establish itself as a hard science
Yeah.
by looking biologically at the brain. And I thought, well, that's it then. If I want to better understand learning and thinking, then it's all going to exist in the brain. Um, So, and don't get me wrong, I love the brain. I'm glad I did it, but
Yeah.
I am now very much convinced that the brain is nowhere near as important as people think it is. It's important, but it's not the
Okay.
end all be all. And I don't think it's the answers that we seek are not going to come from the brain. There's a reason why most universities have different programs for neuroscience and
Yeah.
psychology, why they
Yeah.
hardcore separate the brain from the mind. They're two different entities. And although cognitive psychology is trying to establish the mind within the brain, I just think it's a failed endeavor. I think you will always see things reflected in the brain, but I don't think the brain makes the mind, unfortunately.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, but nowadays you're working with what we might call the science of learning. Even though there's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
just one science of learning, I assume there are many different branches that we could, you know, say
Yeah.
that pertain to that universe. Even what I studied as a master's student, educational psychology, educational neuroscience or neuroeducation. They're kind of cousins, I'd say, right? And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and I think all of us are just trying to understand how we can become better educators, better teachers, and how we can help our students learn more effectively. Is that a
Yeah.
fair definition of your area, what you're doing nowadays?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I typically, and this is important for teachers, I draw a hard line between learning and teaching.
Yeah.
You can be a wonderful teacher and have no clue about learning, or you can know everything about learning and be a horrible teacher. So the two are dissociable. And so I focus primarily on learning. How does learning work? And you're right, that spans dozens of fields and levels, from social levels to cellular levels to animal levels to it's there are dozens and if not hundreds of fields all contributing to it. But I think one thing we're finding is there are basic patterns to learning. If you're a biological entity, there are certain things that happen with learning. Now, what does that mean when you want to walk someone through that process? That's the different ball game. That's where teaching comes in. It's one thing to know how to learn, it's another thing to guide someone through that process. And so my argument has always been the better we understand learning as teachers, the more agency we can take over our craft as teachers. But there is, at the end of the day, that's still our expertise. We still have to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Learning cannot dictate teaching. It can guide it, it can influence it, but it can never dictate it. So any researcher who comes out and says, because we learn like this, you need to teach like this, I usually laugh at them. I'm like, you can't, that
Yeah.
hasn't, that's your opinion on what that means. But really, teaching is different than learning. Knowing how the
That's
brain
true.
reads doesn't tell us how you teach the brain to read. Knowing how the brain does math doesn't tell us how we teach the brain to do math. So I always keep those two separate, but I say if you know a lot about one, that then you can filter that through the other and you're going to get better insights, more agency over the other one.
And it's funny you said that because every time I go to school and then I try to talk to people about the science of learning, I think people have this thing about neuroscience. It's all about neuroscience. They want to learn more about the brain.
Yeah.
And I kind of joke. I say, if a neuroscientist comes here and tells you, I know how the brain works and you should listen to me when you're teaching your fifth graders or something like that. Don't listen to this guy, because maybe he's never been inside the classroom, right? He's never worked with,
Exactly.
with a bunch of kids
Well,
together, right?
could you imagine a teacher going into a neuroscience lab and saying, I'm a teacher, let me tell you how to dissect a brain?
Yeah.
The neuroscientists will kick him out. They say, get out of here. Yet we let that happen in education all the time. We let people who don't know our job come in and say, let me tell you how to teach. And we nod like they have any clue what it is we're trying to do. We kick them out, man. The second they start talking past their field, if a learning scientist talks about teaching, stop listening.
Yeah,
That's
that's
not
it.
their field. They shouldn't, they don't have any clue what it is you're doing, what you're trying to achieve.
And would you say that's why it's really important for the science of learning to look at different fields, not just neuroscience and psychology, but also pedagogy, andragogy, things that relate to teaching, really? Because
Yeah.
I feel that since everybody's kind of into neuroscience, they think neuroscience is sexy, they want to learn more about neuroscience. A lot of teachers in Brazil and potentially around the world, they want to get some kind of specialization course, something that will help
Yeah.
them understand the brain better. But that doesn't really translate well into teaching practice, right? Not
Not
necessarily. Yeah,
not necessarily. It
yeah,
absolutely can it influences you. It changed the way I teach, but not by telling me what to do. Simply by expanding my base of knowledge of why my students act the way they do. Once I started better understanding why they are who they are, I was able to adapt my teaching, but those ideas all had to come from me. They didn't come out of the science of learning. And so I think you're in a very sweet spot where I think you've got learning scientists on one side, you've got teachers on the other, and then you've got translators in between. And these are the few and far between people who understand both the science of learning and have worked in classrooms so they understand teaching and what's going on there. So those
Yeah.
are basically the bridge builders between the fields. And that's why I think you are one of them. And I think that's an
Well,
awesome
thank you.
position to be in.
Yeah.
Because I think what translators end up doing is they help teachers start the interpretation process.
Yeah.
By seeing how another teacher has interpreted and applied this, that gets the ball rolling for them to recognize, oh, there are ways to play with this. There are things I can do without directly dictating to them, here's a new way to teach. Always do this, like visible learning. Do these things, don't do these things.
Yeah.
And so I think the translators are basically the glue that's holding this whole endeavor together. And I love them because they're not dictated. Usually the people I meet who are translators, yourself included, are incredibly humble. They're incredibly nice. They have no interest in dictating anything or
Yeah.
being right or being, hey, congratulations, you solved education. They're more interested in empowering teachers, getting them
Exactly.
to feel better about their job and take more agency. And I love that. That's what makes me happy. So I think your job is the most important one of them all, oddly
Oh,
enough.
that's great. Thank you for saying that, Jared. Now I'm feeling like a rock star, but that's the
you
thing.
you are.
I've been traveling to a lot of schools lately and talking to people about some learning principles that they should take into account when designing their learning experiences, their teaching experiences for those
Yeah.
kids. And so here's the thing. All of that being said, there's a lot more that we can talk about. But are there some universal learning principles that we can share with teachers that
Absolutely.
from the science of learning, and which ones? Can you give me one or two examples so we can talk more about them?
Absolutely. So believe it or not, all human beings learn the same way. That's what makes learning so damn cool. And a lot of people get a little thrown by that, teachers especially,
Yeah.
because we're conflating teaching and learning. But watch this. When I say that all human beings digest the same way, yeah, no one's got a
Yeah.
problem with that. Of course we do.
True.
All human beings breathe the same way. All human beings circulate blood the same way. Because learning is a biological system, all human beings will learn the same way. The difference is the input needed to make the system go.
Yeah.
And that's where teaching comes in. So like if you go back to digestion, we all digest the same, but the input needed changes. I can drink milk, my wife can't. Milk, lactose, she's lactose intolerant. That doesn't get her body activated in any proper way. So what we put into the system, what I need to get a kid moving through learning might change, but the
Yeah.
process itself stays. And so the more we understand the process and the principles underlying that, then we're golden. Now we can fly. So if you want to think of like just some specific principles, like probably my favorite one is that I call it written text and spoken word do not mix.
Yeah.
The idea that human beings cannot read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. It's just the way, because our brain, whenever we read something, our brain interprets that reading, that internal reading voice you hear, it treats it in the same way as an out loud speaking voice. So when you're reading quietly to yourself, so far as your brain knows, you're really listening to you read out loud to yourself. So just like if you've ever had two kids yelling at you at the same time and you realize you can't pay attention to both, it's the same thing. If someone's reading while you're talking over it, they can't pay attention to both.
Yeah.
It's just the brain isn't going to process it that way. So this gives us good insight into cool. What about like design elements? What about like if I've got handouts with words, am I teaching over it? If I have slides with words, am I teaching over that? What about writing? What about note taking? It just once you understand the principle, it doesn't tell you what to do, but it gives you insight to ask better questions about what it is you're going to do as you move forward.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think I do want to, because of your audience specifically with English language teachers too, the big caveat to that is in order for speech and text to clash, you have to be fluent in both of them.
Yeah.
So if like right now I'm teaching my daughter to learn how to read. So the best way to teach her to learn how to read is to point to a word while I say a word because she's not fluent in reading. So bringing the two together is how she's going to develop that fluency. Once she gets good at reading, I got to pull the two apart. But it's the same thing with second language learning. Like I'm learning Italian right now, right?
Oh,
I
cool.
can
Yeah.
read Italian fine, easy as heck. I can't hear it to save my life. They talk way too fast.
Yeah.
So the only way I'm really going to learn how to parse it out, hear it, is if I read along while people speak. That's the easiest way for me to start to learn how to hear that language. Once I start getting fluent at listening, then I'm going to have to pull the two apart. So I think you're in a sweet spot with second language where you've got a little gray zone where you can play a little bit easier. But I just think
Yeah.
that's like one of those cool There's not a human being in the world who can read while listening to somebody speak, as long as they're fluent in both.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting to think that many of us when we're preparing our slides or like you said handouts or something like that, we assume that our students are not going to read while we're talking and giving them instructions, but they are going to read
Yeah.
and they get kind of
Hmm.
bored quite easily nowadays, especially because they have to regulate their dopamine levels, I'd say, based on the
Yeah.
experiences that they're having outside the classroom. So, if there is a text right in front of them and you have to give instructions because, something important is coming, why is there a text in front of them, right? So you can start asking those questions.
Yeah.
What if you have a slide and then you have to explain something, but the slide has a whole paragraph, they will probably be switching, between tasks, listening to
Yeah.
you and then reading a little bit of the text. And so why do you have to have a slide full of text? And I think asking those questions is probably what the science of learning is trying to do, or give
Yeah.
teachers, right? Would you
And
say
and
so?
that's
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
a lot of us will say exact is we assumed the more information you get, the better you can learn, and that's a very that's a good assumption. That was my assumption going into it.
Yeah.
But this is where exactly the science of learning comes in and says actually the way biology works is that more isn't always better.
Yeah.
Correct information at the correct time seems to get the system moving, but just an overflow of information doesn't seem to be the right trick. So exactly, it gives us better in I always say when you study the science of learning, the best thing you can hear is somebody say, "Oh, is that why that works?" Or, "Oh, is that
Yeah.
why that kid always acts like that?" We know it. Like intuitively, we're seeing this stuff all day, every day.
Yeah.
It's just once you can put words to it, once you can put mechanisms to it, then you take a little more agency and you start to go, cool. Now I see, okay, here's why I want to try this. And when someone asks, why do you teach like that? You tell them, because people learn like this is why I teach like that. It just gives you that control over it.
Exactly. And I think I wanted to mention, just because you were talking about this now, that
Yeah.
Jared was really cool. Just, this is like one of the most awesome gifts I ever got. So you sent over your book to me all the way from the US. Stop Talking, Start Influencing. One of my favorite books now. I actually take this everywhere when I'm visiting schools and I talk about those principles. And you talk about this one, text and speech, right? Right at the
Yep,
beginning
yep.
here. So talk about that. And then you have a bunch of other principles here that are very interesting. They're based on the science of learning. And I
Yeah.
just wanted you to talk a little bit about the idea of spacing because, we, I think we all have the tendency as educators to, assign a lot of homework on the same day we gave students input, right? Get
Yeah.
home and do all the homework that we assign. We give them a lot of worksheets and things like that. We have this tendency to believe that the more you do about this thing that you have just learned, air quotes
Yeah.
here, the better, because then you will consolidate that into your long-term memory. But that's not how the brain works, right?
It's a good kind of rule of thumb when it comes to learning is quantity, or excuse me, frequency is more important than quantity.
Yeah.
So, in a very real sense, if you do less of something, but you do that thing every day, you will learn that stuff better than if you do a lot of one thing in a single day. In a very real sense, man, if you gave me 5 minutes of practice every day versus 1 hour of practice 1 day a week, give me the 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Biology works on the frequency principle, not the quantity principle. You basically just have to activate something, then step away from it, and the body will handle the rest. This is one of the things I'm getting pretty deep into now. so I'm working on a documentary on genius. So there's a whole
Oh yeah.
section on creativity. Where does it come from? And the more you dive into that, the more you realize, like, man, there's a lot of overlap between creativity and every other skill, basically learning skills. And you see, I would argue about 80% of all deep creativity happens when you're not paying attention anymore, when you leave, when you step away from the problem and let
Yeah.
your biology do the work. And so it's the same thing with all learning. So if you look at, say, homework, it's interesting. The impact of homework is with young kids is basically nothing. And that's not because homework isn't good for them. It's because in order for young kids to learn from homework, they need adult supervision. So if a
Yeah.
kid has a parent helping them, they can learn. If a kid doesn't have a parent helping them, they won't learn. So it's usually a wash. So unless you can guarantee all your kids will have help from their parents, I usually am an advocate for young kids. Don't worry about homework. It's because you're gonna
Yeah.
start to differentiate them pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But as you get older, homework can work. But the trick we've seen is the only time homework works is when it is short blasts of practice-based homework. So when you're doing something that you're already pretty good at or that we're ready to lock down, as opposed to learning something new or practicing something that is brand new. Now, there's ways
Yeah.
to make brand new stuff work. We can talk about that in a second. But realistically, the best impact from homework, 60 minutes a night total. That's not 60 minutes per class. That is 60 minutes total. So if you
Total. Yeah.
assume you've got, say, 6 classes, that's a max 10 minutes per class.
Yeah.
How are we ever going to get 10 minutes? That's not enough for homework. It is when you remember frequency is more important than quantity. 10 minutes, 5 minutes of practice-based homework that just activates ideas, gets it ready again, locked it down, and then go to bed. Congratulations, you will learn more doing that 5 nights a week than if you did a 3 hour
Exactly.
study session one night a week. So frequency over quantity becomes the big kind of keyword when it comes to learning, which is why when we talk about curriculum, there's so much circularity. At the beginning of today's class, we're reviewing what we did yesterday. At the end of tomorrow's class, we're reviewing what we did last week. We're constantly circling back to what we've done in the past because we're getting that frequency hit. More and more and more we see it. We're not spending all day on the same topic every day. Just a 2 minute blast. Remember what we saw yesterday? That's enough. Now we can go forward again. So that's why that stuff becomes so important.
Yeah, and you know what? Since you mentioned homework, I also got a quote from your book because I have both your books. Do you have any other books? Have you published any?
Oh, I got four other books, but you
Four.
wouldn't
Okay,
want to
so
read those. They're they're
I
they're academic. They're basically the other books I
okay,
wrote just because you have to write books to keep your job in academia. So
sure.
they're
Yeah.
they're doorstops.
So I got the best two then, right? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. And you wrote something here about homework that, I always quote you here, Jared, because I think this is very important. And a lot of schools in Brazil are considered, we call them content-based or conteudistas because they really focus on just giving a lot of input as much
Yeah, yeah.
as possible so that students can learn. But we're seeing the opposite now because
Yeah.
students are under a lot of stress. They are, well, some of them are actually having mental health issues. But
Yeah.
anyway, what you wrote here is herein lies the primary issue of opportunity cost. Many schools assign too much homework, which needlessly pushes students beyond their natural limits. Beyond potentially harming learning, this practice also reduces the time students have to undertake personally meaningful activities, which may drive different forms of social, emotional, and personal learning, not typically reflected in exams. And I wanted to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this because nowadays this is combined with a lot of screen time, right? And we are
Um,
seeing this all over. I mean, I visit schools in Brazil where parents are complaining because their kids cannot use their phones in the classroom. I've been to schools where kids actually used AI to do terrible things, even
mhm.
spread fake images of their classmates and things like that.
To which I respond, what did you think kids were gonna do,
Of
man? When
course,
we were
right?
kids, you give us AI, we're gonna do the same thing, man.
That's the thing. We know it's unlimited access to limitless, resources. You can do whatever you want, and you're not ready, biologically
Yeah.
speaking, to inhibit those urges, those impulses.
Yeah.
So would you say that now we are at a very delicate point in human history that because I know you are an advocate for banning or limiting ed tech and screen time
Oh,
so
yes.
kids can actually do what they're supposed to do, have a normal childhood, playing
And
on the street
learn while
and
in
learn,
school?
right? So what would you
Sounds smart to me.
right? Like we did, because we grew up in that kind of setting that we didn't have access to everything we wanted. We had to control our desires. We had to be patient. We had to take
Yeah.
turns, and nowadays it feels like none of that is required anymore, or it's not working. So what would you say about this new scenario?
Well, it's this craziest thing is we stopped training it.
Yeah.
And we're being told by outsiders that when we do try and train kids how to act, that we're being draconian or somehow school is now a prison. It's like, how do you think do you think we came into the world knowing how to line up for lunch? Hell no. Kids have to learn this stuff. Do you think we came into the world knowing how to sit quietly in a room in order to learn? No, but everyone's like, well, we shouldn't have to do that. Of course we should have to do that. That is literally everything. If I can't train you how to be in school, then I guarantee you parents aren't training you how to be while in a restaurant. No one else is training you how to be while at work. We all have very specific behavioral sets that we have to use in different contexts. And school is the only context where everyone seems to be saying, screw you, you're doing it wrong. Change the
Yeah.
way you do it. And I'm like, no, we have to train. But the problem is when you start bringing in a lot of these tools, kids are spending thousands of hours a year outside of school on these devices, acting in a very specific way, which is counter to how we need them to act if we want them to learn. So as soon as we bring those devices into a classroom, we trigger their thinking, oh, computer, I know how to act on this. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. Don't act like that now. Well, you just showed me the tool, and of course I'm going to act in that way. So this is one of the reasons if you start getting rid of tech, you start training kids to understand that this context is different than home. In this context, we have to act differently. We have to think differently. We have to behave and believe differently if we want to get learning done here. And I'm a huge advocate for that. I always say, man, ed tech, if it only existed in the classroom, may have been one of the best things we ever invented. But the second digital technologies entered the home, they were no longer a learning tool. They should not
Yeah.
exist in the classroom anymore. It's like TVs. TVs were always in the classroom until they entered the home. And then they became tools for basically just entertainment and advertising. Now you'd be hard pressed to find a classroom where a TV is embedded in the wall because we realized it's no longer a learning tool. It's too hard to get kids to think in the way I need them to think using this tool because they're training themselves differently.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you'll see chalkboards in a classroom, but you won't see chalkboards at home because we now know that's a learning tool that exists here and
That's
nowhere
true.
else.
Yeah.
So I'm very much an advocate for school is doing fine. It's doing good. But the more we do school at school, the less we have to do school outside of school. And that's where the
Yeah.
zero sum game of time really comes in. Is right now, because we're not getting everything done in school that we need, because all we're doing is basically fighting kids a lot of the times with behavioral issues and trying to get them to focus, that we need to tap into their home time. Once we tap into their home time, that is necessarily time they no longer will have to do other things.
Yeah.
So I think if we can do school a little bit more focused, we can do a lot less homework, and then that frees them up to do whatever they want to do at home. And now then the onus becomes on the parents rather than the
Yeah.
teachers to start to limit or decide how they want to do tech. Because right now, parents really don't have to make big decisions because they can blame us. Parents can always step back and say, well, they're using computers in school, so I can't tell them not to use computers. But if we stop using computers in schools, now there is no more blame. Now it goes back to the
Exactly.
family and the unit to make the decision on how do I want to handle tech in my family. And
Yeah.
if you want to let her rip, let her rip. If you want to force your kid to go outside, make him go outside. It goes back to the parents now.
And here in Brazil, and I know this happened in Australia as well. You've been traveling to Australia quite a lot, right?
Oh,
I
I
mean,
lived there for
you
12
live
years.
there,
Yep, yep.
right? So I think
Yeah.
this is happening there too. They're banning phones in schools now. I think
M-
here in Brazil there's a
Most
law.
fun. Yep.
Yeah, but so I don't
Well,
know if it's
they banned social media for all kids under 16.
okay.
And then a lot of the independent schools are banning phones outright. I'm making a video on this right now, so I should clarify this. The
Yeah,
reason they're doing that is because the data has been very clear for quite some time that
yeah,
if you want to see benefits of a phone-free school, you have to ban them. You cannot
Yeah.
have policies. Once you have policies, you see no impact whatsoever. Like kids can use it between classes, they can use it at recess, or they have it in their
Yeah.
backpack, but they can't touch it. Quote, nope.
Yeah.
They just can't exist. If they don't exist, you see benefits. If they still have the temptation, if it's sitting in their locker and they still have the ability to think about it, you won't see the benefits you need. So that's why a lot of the Aussie schools are going to hard bans now.
Okay. So here's a question, because I think there's an argument that I hear from parents and school managers and even policymakers. They say, yeah, but kids have different learning styles, so we have to cater to those learning styles, and the only way to do that is offering a piece of tech that, a screen that they can, I don't know, access a different type of input, different format of media or something like that, or they say, well, but kids, they have to work with those tools when they graduate, right? So we have to teach them how to use them well. Those are some of
Yeah.
the arguments I hear all the time. And thank you so much for clarifying those, because I've been listening to you for a while. So I usually use your arguments to counter argument what they say. But what would you say to those arguments about
Well, so
learning
let's
styles
start.
and in using the tools outside the classroom, because they work
If
with them?
we start with the second one, kids
Yeah.
need to learn how to use these tools. I got no problem with that. Absolutely, they do. But that's a curriculum argument. You're now telling me what I need to teach. That is different than a pedagogical argument. How do I need to teach? So if we agree that kids need to use computers, cool. We teach them how to use computers, preferably in a computer lab where computers are tied to a wall. It does not follow that I now need to use computers to teach every class.
Yeah.
Now, when I'm teaching math, I can decide what's the best tool to teach math. If it ain't tech, I ain't going to use it. What's the best tool to teach writing? And if it ain't tech, and it most certainly isn't, I ain't going to use it. So we can still teach kids how to use computers without dictating every teacher needs to use a computer in every class at all
Yeah.
times. I mean, I would just draw it back to like driving. Kids will have to drive when they're older. Does that mean we should move schools into cars?
Yeah.
Like, no, we realize, look, I'll teach you how to drive, but I'm also going to teach you how to kick a soccer ball over here. They're two different things. So I've got no problem with having a computer lab in school where you can teach computer skills. I just have a problem with a free-for-all tech everywhere.
Yeah.
And when it comes to phones specifically, so phones are hilarious because everyone's like, oh, they got to learn how to use phones well. Mate, no one knows how to use phones well. As adults, we are as addicted as they are. The
That is
stats on
true, yeah.
adult usage of cell phones is trash. So if us with our fully developed cognitive abilities, if we can't use it well, how the hell you think a 6-year-old is going to figure out how to use a phone well?
Yeah.
I've been asking for years, for almost a decade now. Every time I go to a school and I have to talk about tech, I say, give me one reason why a kid would need a cell phone during school. Give me one.
Yeah.
And I swear, if I ever hear a good example, I will never talk badly about cell phones in school again. But almost a decade, I haven't heard a single reasonable answer. The answers are always like, what if I got to get a hold of my kid? Well, there's a phone in the front of the school. We've been doing that for decades. Well, what if my kid needs to get a hold of me? There's a phone in the front of the school. That's what the front office is there for. Oh, well, what if there's and the big one everyone says in the US
An
is what if there's a
emergency or
school
something.
shooting. Yep,
Oh, yeah.
boom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you talk to first responders, the one thing they hate is when everyone has a cell phone during an emergency because it confuses the daylights out of them. They lose the ability to communicate and they don't
Exactly.
really have good information on what's going on. They always say the more cell phones in a school during a school shooting, the worse our response is going to be. It does not help us.
Yeah.
All you need is one person calling it in and then they can do their job. And beyond that, there's no evidence that having a cell phone has ever alleviated any of that stuff at any
No.
time either. So, I mean, it's just,
And what just something that came up now, just, I was thinking, I think the kids who do those things, school shootings, they have mental health issues that were probably caused by their use of ed tech or phones or or something like that, or at least enhanced, maximized
helped.
because it hasn't helped, right? So maybe they're not looking at this from the right angle, I guess,
And
parents
that's,
and school managers. Yeah.
and if you think of the learning angle, people say, well, you use phones to learn. Well, you can use computers to do exactly the same thing you can do on a phone. So even if you acknowledge that you can have a computer lab with computers, it still does not say a cell phone just has no reason for existing in a school at any moment at any level.
Yeah.
I've never, you can take pictures on it. That's literally why we have a photo lab. Come on, that's what schools do. We're going to teach you how to take pictures. So I don't know. So that one has always kind of done my head in. But if you go back to then the learning styles, I'm one of the
Yeah.
few learning scientists where learning styles doesn't really bother me. There, you'll see a lot of people who immediately jump on that and go, "Oh, they don't exist. They're a
I used
myth."
to do that too, but then after reading your article, I said, well, I have to think about this again, you know? Yeah.
It's yeah, it's not that they don't exist. Like I got no problem saying people have different ways they like to learn. It just they don't seem to matter all that much. So all the data comes back that when you tailor your pedagogy to the individual student, they don't learn better, and then oftentimes they learn worse than when you tailor your pedagogy to the content you are
Yeah.
teaching. So, use a simple example. If I want to teach you how to dance, everyone will learn better if we get up and dance
Yeah.
versus if
If they
just
watch a video or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, if you're visual, just look at it. If you're auditory, I'll just describe it to you. If we're learning how to paint, everyone learns better when they get up and paint. If we're
Yeah.
learning history,
Yeah.
everyone learns better when we talk about history rather than smell it or taste it, whatever other options we got.
Yeah.
So we had this whole differentiation movement where we're like, try and tailor to the kids' specific needs. And that's where tech's like, we can do that. But you don't want to tailor to the kids' specific needs. You want to tailor to the specific needs of the curriculum, the content you are teaching. And love it or hate it, everyone will learn better in that way. Now, there are going to be certain examples, specific learning disabilities, where, like, if you're
Yeah.
blind and you can't see, if you're in a wheelchair and you can't stand up and dance, then that's where technology has demonstrated a positive impact because we can get you to experience learning that you otherwise would never have been able to get a hold of. So believe it or not, when it comes to specific learning disorders, that's the only spot where tech seems to be doing decent work. Congratulations. But the vast majority of us don't have specific learning disorders. That's, in fact, 90%
Exactly.
of us do not by definition. So that's where the tech thinks they're doing good work, but they're not. And if you want to do a double whammy, the more you cater to a kid's specific needs, the more you basically hog tie them. You are now telling them
Mm.
you can only do one thing, and we're going to feed this one thing. And by the time you get out of school, you're going to be good at one thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I need you good at everything. And that's where K through 12 general education has always been important. We experience a lot of things in K through 12, and that's the point. Some we're good at, some we're not good at, some we like, some we don't like, but it's through those experiences we broaden our ability base rather than narrow it. And like if you tell a piece of tech, this kid is really good at listening to things, tech will make you listen to things.
Yeah.
If you tell a teacher, this kid is really good at listening to things, a teacher typically goes, cool, I'm going to make him look at things. Why?
That's
Why?
true. Yeah.
Because I'm here to help you boost your weaknesses. If you're already good at
Yeah.
something, why would I waste my time doing it? That's the difference between a teacher and a piece of tech. We recognize our goals are typically I need to expand your repertoire. I'm going to use your strengths to feed into your weaknesses to boost those. But I'm not just going to play your strengths. That's a waste of everyone's time.
So we don't have to worry about being replaced by tech as teachers, right?
Oh God, no.
No,
Well,
that's what
if
people are
you
talking about. Yeah.
the
Especially with
biggest
AI.
moderator of
Yeah.
learning is relationship, and you
Yeah.
literally cannot form an empathetic relationship with a piece of tech. So no, if so long as you want learning to be what it is, no. But if we redefine learning to mean that which we do on these tools, then people will, and that's what they're doing now. They're redefining learning to mean what I can do well with AI, and that's a kind of silly to me because it's a very lesser form of learning than what I'm doing with humans. So you have the choice. You can choose to say, yep, learning is actually this. But I promise you the type of learning kids are doing with AI is magnitudes of order worse than what we were doing back in the 90s when we didn't even have that option.
It's really detrimental to learning, I'd say, because they're not making the effort of they're not building synapses in their brain. They're asking a tool, a tech tool, an AI to do that for them. So they're not really
Imagine you
learning,
go
right?
to the gym and I give you a tool that's going to work out for you.
Yeah.
Does that sound like it's going to be a meaningful trip to the gym for you? Of course
Yeah.
not. And everyone recognizes it there, but no one recognizes it when it comes to learning. It's very hard to get people to recognize the more you offload learning, the worse you're going to do. You can't shortcut it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, nothing happens. There is no next step if you skip the first step, unfortunately.
That's true. Well, since we're approaching the end of this amazing episode, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the work you're doing now, especially
Yeah,
with
yeah.
LME Global and the Learning Blueprint. So, if you can tell us a little bit about what those things are, what you've been doing lately. I know you're traveling
Yeah.
again in a couple
Oh,
of days, right?
always. I got
Yeah.
Miami tomorrow, then back to Australia. Yeah, I'm everywhere. But no, it's fun.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's so what I've been able to do with LME is I used to teach a master's course on the science of learning, 36 hours of material, but I would only teach it to like 30 kids a year. And so
Yeah.
I decided that's what I want to do. I want to get that out. So we have two programs for the science of learning. One is for teachers, which is basically a full master's program. And here's how learning works. Here's how you can play with it. He gives you ways to apply it and stuff. And then I also built a metacognition course for students because my data really suggests that when kids understand learning, not study strategies, learning the same way
Yeah.
we do, that's when they take agency. That's when you get metacognition and they start to actually run with their own learning. So there's a program for teachers and one for students. And then the other thing, big thing I'm working on, like I mentioned, is I got a documentary on genius coming out, which is
That's
super
awesome.
fun.
Yeah.
So hopefully we just finished the pilot on that one. I should have final cut next week on that. And then you gotta distribution is fun. Now we gotta go
Yeah.
through funding rounds. We got to figure out who's going to be the distributor, all the animation stuff. It's going to be fun, but hopefully that comes out. And then off the back end of that, I'm just finishing two books now, one on genius. So the book will go with the doco. And then I'm working on another book I just started now called The Ed Tech Revolution Has Failed. It's time to put all of this into
Yeah.
one spot for the teachers who just need the evidence, the ammo to support why they, because I think a lot of teachers have recognized for a long time that tech is not helping, that it's not a good thing, but we don't have the right arguments to push back with.
That's
We don't
true.
have the
Yeah.
evidence, so we're just kind of left floundering. So I wanted to make sure I could put that all together, so anyone wanting to push back in their school can say, "Here, this is the evidence we got."
And you know what? For anyone listening to us, you should probably go to Jared YouTube channel. Your YouTube channel is really cool. You
Oh
talk about,
yeah,
yeah, and you have an amazing video about how the ed tech revolution has failed that we used a couple of times. Last year we had a major event here in Brazil, the Brass Diesel
yeah.
conference, and we actually played your video and had a bunch of teachers discuss that, and they were so relieved, after watching your video because
Isn't
everybody
that
knows that intuitively,
that's the
right?
funny? The response is typically "Thank you," like
Yeah,
somebody said
somebody
it.
said it,
It's
right? Yeah, yeah.
That
That
is the
was,
best thing. I think we've known for a long time that this is
yeah.
not going well, but it's who's going to stand up and who's going to lock it down. I'm so glad you were able to use that. That's awesome.
That's it. And for anyone looking for an amazing course, you should check out the Learning Blueprint. That I've actually done a couple of sessions with a school here in Brazil, and everybody just gave me amazing feedback about. Jared is an awesome teacher, so just listen to him and you learn a lot. You read the stuff he puts out there, you learn a lot, right? And I think the idea is to expand this program, right, Jared?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Get it out. That's what we want. We want to translate it. We want to get it out because there's only one, like you were saying, there's only one us, right?
yeah,
We can only travel so much, and that sucks. So how can we get us out a little bit wider in a way that at least lets people deal with this information in a stronger way? So that's why our platforms, the learning platforms, are very locked down. They're not tech
yeah.
heavy. They're very much just tech intentional. They're more movies than anything else with thinking prompts. So, but that's where it's you could teach 30 kids a year, or you could hopefully teach 300, and that's what
Yeah.
we're hoping to reach that wider kind of crew to get these ideas out.
And I'm sure you're going to get there, buddy. And you know what? To finish this episode, because this is the Learning Cosmos, and I have to ask you some geeky questions. I don't know if it's only
Oh, hit
me,
me.
but I want to know if you have like a favorite sci-fi movie or book or something like that. Are you a geek like me, or
Oh my
has
gosh,
that
that's all I
influence?
do.
Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
100%. I
Okay.
just finished Stephen King's It, which I'll be honest with
Oh,
you,
it's very good.
surprised the heck out of me. I
Yeah.
was I was
Yeah.
expecting like I don't read Stephen King, so that was my first one. I was
Okay.
expecting just meh. Dude's got a lot of subtext. I have to
Yeah.
give him credit. Amazing subtext. The I finished recently the Mistborn trilogy from Brandon Sanderson.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't
The
started,
first
but
ones.
yeah.
So
Okay.
there's two. There's Mistborn, the first three. Then he's got like the sub four books after it with the different characters. The last four books suck. The first three, the original trilogy, probably the best tied together trilogy I've ever read. Like everything
Awesome. Yeah.
hits. There's no loose strands, and it hits well. So I'd say that's right now kind of probably top of my list of like that was good. That was very solid.
That's pretty cool. What about Star Wars? Are you a big fan of Star Wars?
I
or
am
not
Star
really?
Wars over Star Trek. I like them both, but I'm a Warzy fan. But to be fair,
Yeah,
only the originals, right? I
the
don't.
originals.
I'm
Yeah.
too old to like. I know Jar Jar Binks and stuff, but all the new stuff, I don't know what the heck is going on anymore. How
Yeah,
about you?
you should, you should,
What are you
you
into right
should.
now?
Yeah, so I'm actually into this very cool series that is not really scientifically accurate, but it's called Severance.
Yeah,
I don't know if
the
you've.
the HBO show.
It's I think it's Apple Plus or something.
Yeah,
It's
that one.
it's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
cool because they play a little bit with the idea of what if we could kind of split our memory consolidation process depending on the place where we were. So we can go to
yeah.
work and we can turn in this microchip and then we just make memories from work there, and then when we come back we forget everything that happened at work. What if we
So you
could
go
do
back to
that with
living
it?
your life in the real
And
world.
you have no idea what you did at work. And then they're exploring different layers, like, okay, what if you're working for terrorists, or what if you're building a biological weapon or something like that, and you have no
Yeah,
idea
yeah.
because so it's
Because
very
you forget
cool.
his. I like. Oh, I'm gonna watch. So
You should
it's an
watch
Apple
it.
show.
It's Apple show, and one of the producers is Ben Stiller, and he's an amazing guy. I really like his work, and I was
Dude,
very
better
very.
director that like he's a wonderful actor, but he's a really, really
No, he's
good
a very good
director.
director. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was really amazed. And now I think the season finale is coming out like today, so the second season. So I'm really looking
So you're
forward
going
to that.
straight from this to go
So,
watch
yeah,
that. You're
I'm
like,
probably gonna watch it. But I'm also a huge fan of. You mentioned Stephen King, right? I
yeah, yeah.
love all his work. I mean, this guy. I wonder how the hell did this guy write so many books, man? And so
Yeah.
many books were adapted, right, into movies, and all the movies I watched based on his books were really good, right?
Yeah.
And then I started going back to the books, and yeah, I'm really inspired by his work. I thought,
I have a feeling the
yeah,
reason I've always avoided him was because he just pumps out so much stuff. I'm like, there's no way this is good.
yeah,
But then at the end of it, the very last thing he wrote is I started this book in July 1981. I finished it in July 1985.
yeah.
So it's like I'm like, dude, you actually took he acknowledged you took time. So I have a feeling, and I could be I now I got to read his stuff. But I have a feeling his earlier stuff, and when he became Richard Bachman, remember when he split into
Yeah,
two?
yeah.
I have a feeling that stuff is going to be good, but his more recent stuff, I have a feeling his editors are going to be like, yeah, that's fine, because they know they're going to make a shit ton of money off of him.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to see if the quality doesn't start to dip a little bit as we go further. But I'm just starting my trip, so I'll let you know in about 5 years. Once I read them
Cool.
all, I'll tell you what I think.
Cool. Well, Jared, thank you so much for geeking out a little bit with me here. And, this is going to make this first episode really special. I just wanted you to, well, maybe send a final message to our listeners here about the science of
Yeah.
learning or where to find your work. Please talk about your YouTube channel, social media
Hey,
handles, whatever you want.
man, if you just look up Jared Cooney Horvath on YouTube, I put out videos every couple weeks on new learning stuff. So if you're a teacher and you're interested in that, there you go. LMEglobal.net. That's where we have all the other material and the programs and the courses and books and stuff. And beyond that, I just want to remind you, man, you're a teacher, you are an expert. Teaching is just like anything else in this world. It's a skill, it's a craft, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. The world thinks everyone can teach. Oh, I've been to class, I can teach. Nothing bothers me more than that. You guys are teachers, you guys are the experts at teaching. So do not let outsiders dictate our job. The more we take agency over our job, the more we can push back and say, this isn't just a hobby, this is a real profession with real practices, and we're doing it better than anyone else. So keep doing what you do. It's the best thing in the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jared Cooney Horvath. I'm sure that everybody is going to start following your amazing work. And thank you so much for promoting great practices and actually getting people to start thinking about what they do as teachers and also as learners. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
You're
for
doing it too.
accepting
So thank you.
my invitation. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much. And I guess we'll see each other again on the next episode of the Learning Cosmos podcast. Bye bye.